there, this is Jean Tiberio, and you're listening to Healing Outside the Box. Today's episode 117, and I'm calling it, Is Energy Contagious? Given that it's Christmas season and also the beginning of flu season, I thought I'd tell you another story. I guess this would be my second installment of my Christmas storytelling, because who wants to hear about carrots and zucchini just before Christmas? So today, once again, like last week, I'm going to tell you a story that's outside the box and is also still somewhat controversial. This is a story about something called empathetic blending. Another way to look at this is that it's the sharing of energy either between people, between a person and a pet, or even a person and another object such as a medicinal substance or plant. So far, I imagine you're buying this, but let's get into it a bit more. I'll start by telling you a couple of stories. One I think is connected to negative energy that was transferred, and another that's about positive energy that I think was transferred from one person to another. This idea occurred to me recently because I read, I guess what I would call a very controversial article about empathetic blending by this guy named Dr. Lawrence Wilson. I chose not to give you the link because he does get into the deep end of the pool a bit too much for my comfort level. But I'll leave that up to you. You can certainly Google his name if you'd like to read the article. And it's called Empathetic Blending. First, story number 1. The day was 9/11/2001. My home health aide came in to get me up and said, "Jean, there seems to be some kind of bombing going on. It's all over the TV." So the two of us sat silently watching the TV. And like most of us at home at the time, we could only guess what might be happening. After 3 or 4 hours of watching the tragedy on TV and physically watching the towers collapse as they were collapsing, I felt like I needed to get out of the house. I couldn't stop staring at the TV, but I needed to stop staring at the TV. So I went out in my wheelchair. It was an absolutely perfect day, by the way. Definitely a 10, with brilliant sunshine and a light breeze from the ocean. I live only a block from the ocean, so I assured my home health aide that I would be okay by myself and wheeled my wheelchair down to the wharf that jets out from the ocean. I wheeled myself almost to the lighthouse at the end of the wharf, then turned to stare at the rocking sailboats and seagulls diving for the mussels in the shallow water. The seagulls seemed completely unconvinced that there was anything else going on other than their fresh lunch. But dogs may be a different story. I started to feel guilty that I was feeling pleasure when others were feeling so much pain, so I turned to go back home to watch more TV. I moved towards the mainland, maybe about 10 to 12 feet, when I heard and saw what appeared to be a black Doberman Pinscher, not on a leash, who was barking and growling at me. The dog then started to charge me, then stopped, then started barking and growling again. I instinctively stopped my wheelchair because I knew that certain dogs find this electronic device intimidating. To them, it seems somewhat like a motorcycle that they can actually chase and catch up to. But I've actually never been bitten in my wheelchair while driving it, with one minor exception, those little yippy dogs, and he just bit me on the ankle, barely piercing my skin. But this was different. This was a Doberman Pinscher, and this dog was very angry. Usually when I stop moving, the dog stops approaching, but not on that day. The dog kept charging a few feet forward, then stopped to bark and growl. The barking and growling got louder and more intense. I turned away so as not to stare down the dog, and when I did, I saw that a crowd was starting to gather to watch the spectacle. Cars were slowing down, and even a few of them pulled over to stare out their window. I yelled a couple of times, "Does anyone own this dog? Does anyone have a sandwich or a cookie to give to the dog?" People looked at each other and looked at me. Several people actually took a few steps forward towards me, but not towards the dog. But then they eventually stopped moving forward. It must have occurred to everyone that someone being brave, like we were witnessing when the firefighters were climbing up the Twin Towers to save those people is really a lot harder than it looks on TV. So I knew I wasn't going to move forward. The dog would charge, and it seemed obvious to me that going backwards would create a chase situation, so I just stood still. As I said, there were several people edging forward towards me, but at some point in a group, they just simply could not make that plunge. Actually, the reality of the situation was that if several people moved forward towards me, that may have made matters worse. What we needed was some food. Lucky for all of us, this beautiful seaside wharf is a national park. And here comes a park ranger who heard me ask for some food. She then, and yes, it was a she, took some food from a tourist who was more than happy to give up their food so that someone else could take charge. And this park ranger stooped down and held the sandwich out to the dog. The dog was still growling and barking, but now, about 20 to 30 minutes into this episode, the dog started looking at the sandwich, then looking at me, then looking at the sandwich, then looking at me. I wasn't doing anything spectacular. In fact, I wasn't moving at all. So after looking at the sandwich one more time, the dog ran over and happily started eating the sandwich, like it was all supposed to happen. 2 police officers then grabbed the dog and put the dog in the back of their police car. I then proceeded forward to greet the group of people, who numbered about 50 or 60 at that point. We all looked so very relieved, and I was hugged, and we told stories about how scared we all were. There is no doubt in my mind, looking back, that the tension of that day created the negative energy that was absorbed by that dog. I don't know it to be true, I just believe it. And here is story number 2 about positive energy. When I was a senior in high school, I started to do meditation on a regular basis. After only a few weeks, I was already starting to feel differently. I'm not sure I could have even explained it at the time. I just felt calmer. About a year into doing this meditation, which happens to be TM, but it could be any meditation, I went with my sister on a weekend meditation retreat. The physical setting was absolutely beautiful. It was in the country and in the woods up in Vermont. Fresh snow had just fallen. The view from inside the window was visually calming, and the smell of fresh burning wood in the fireplace of this beautiful country inn created an atmosphere where positive energy was meant to happen. We did group meditations 3 times per day. On the second day, after one of these group meditations, I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of relaxation. This is a moment that some people call a moment of bliss. There was no doubt in my mind that the group meditation was much more powerful than meditating by myself. Positive energy was shared in that room. I don't know that to be true, but I just believe it. Now, scientists would explain energy transfer by sometimes calling it induction. This word induction is often used when describing the forces of, say, electricity or magnets. Now, we all get that. If we walk across a rug on a dry day and touch a person, we can then give that person a mild electrical shock. We accept that this is real because we've experienced it. But what this guy, Dr. Lawrence Wilson, is saying is that we have experienced the sharing of other types of energy, both positive and negative, without being able to name it. Now again, Dr. Wilson dives too much into the deep end of the pool for my taste, but you're welcome to read his article. So giving a person a mild electrical shock when the air is dry is pretty much a given. That is induction. But going a step beyond that is a phrase that is referred to as imprinting. A person leaves a trace or imprint on another person due to this blending of energy. This more often than not happens when 2 people know each other very well. Say 2 people in a romantic relationship, a parent and a child obviously, or a doctor or nurse with a patient. Now, an extreme of this type of energy blending would be from a plant to a plant. I recently saw a documentary by Tom Shadyac. This documentary is called I Am. And in this film, he showed what happens when he gives one climbing plant, and I think it was green beans, a string or stick to climb on, and doesn't give another plant a string or stick to climb on. He gave the first plant a string to climb, and the plant was very happy. Then he put another plant far away and did not give the plant a string. That plant started to grow, did not find the string, and died. Next, he put the second green bean plant about 12 inches away from the first green bean plant, which had the string. The second plant actually grew towards the first plant and found that string and started to climb the string of the first plant. This is clearly a phenomena we don't believe in until we see. This reminds me of a time back in the 17th century when a terrible plague struck Western Europe. That plague was caused by a bacteria. Because people at the time couldn't see the organism that was causing this disease, it never occurred to them that something that was invisible to the naked eye could kill all of those people. The bacteria was in the water supply, as we know now. It's interesting that there were dead bodies floating in that water and people were drinking from that water. So how did they not know that the disease was in the water? The next logical step would be to try boiling the water and then figure out that the boiled water did not cause disease, which is eventually what they did. At the time, people must have wondered, how can we understand something that we cannot see and feel? And I guess in the year 2017, it will be 2017 soon, perhaps we should be asking this question when it comes to the transfer of energy. And of course, positive energy rather than negative energy. This reminds me of a quote from Mother Teresa. Now, someone told me about this quote, so I don't have the exact words, and I'm paraphrasing, but it goes something like this. Instead of attending an anti-war protest, wouldn't it be better to attend a pro-peace rally? That way we can share positive energy, because negative energy, even in the pursuit of a good cause, is still negative energy. She may be quite right about that. No, I don't pretend to have the answers, or how even to explain the situation that is going on in the country right now, but maybe we should take a page from Mother Teresa's book and just think good thoughts. Now that's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.